The turkey was golden brown, the cranberry sauce glistened in my grandmother's crystal bowl, and the scent of pumpkin pie drifted from the kitchen. Everything looked perfect for Thanksgiving dinner at my sister's house in suburban Minneapolis. The dining room buzzed with conversation as my extended family gathered around the mahogany table that had witnessed decades of holiday celebrations. I was carrying the heavy casserole dish, my hands slightly trembling from nerves, when my heel caught the edge of the Persian rug. Time seemed to slow as I felt myself losing balance, the hot dish slipping from my grasp. The crash echoed through the room as green bean casserole splattered across the hardwood floor, and my body followed, landing hard on my knees among the mess. But it wasn't the physical pain that cut deepest. It was the sound that followed laughter, not the gentle, sympathetic chuckle of people who understood accidents happen, but the sharp, mocking laughter of people who had been waiting for me to fail. My brother-in-law slapped his knee, nearly choking on his wine. "There goes clumsy Margaret again," he wheezed between laughs. My nephew pulled out his phone, trying to capture the aftermath. Even my own sister, the hostess, shook her head with that familiar look of embarrassment she'd worn whenever I was around, since we were children. As I knelt there among the scattered green beans and broken ceramic, something crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just about a stumble. This was about a lifetime of being seen as the family failure, the one who couldn't do anything right. At 57 years old, I had spent decades trying to prove myself worthy of their respect, their love, their basic human decency. But as their laughter echoed in my ears, I realized I was done seeking their approval. The humiliation of that Thanksgiving dinner followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. I sat in my small apartment that night, still picking green bean fragments from my sweater, replaying every second of their cruel amusement. The way my sister had immediately started complaining about her ruined rug, instead of asking if I was hurt. The way my mother had pursed her lips in that disapproving way that said, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" The way my father had simply looked away, as if acknowledging my existence would somehow diminish him. This wasn't new. Growing up in our house in St. Paul, I had always been the afterthought, the one who didn't quite fit the family mold. While my sister excelled at everything: cheerleading, honor roll, prom queen, I was the awkward one who preferred books to parties, who asked too many questions, who never seemed to say the right thing at the right time. When she got her nursing degree, the family threw a celebration party. When I graduated from community college with my criminal justice degree at 28, after working 2 jobs to pay for it myself, they sent a card. But that night, sitting alone with my bruised knees and wounded pride, something shifted inside me. I had spent my entire life allowing their perception of me to define my reality. I had shrunk myself to fit into their narrow expectations, apologized for taking up space, minimized my dreams to avoid their skepticism. The woman who had stumbled in that dining room was not the woman I wanted to be. She was the woman they had convinced me I was. I walked to my bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection. Really looked. I saw a woman with intelligent eyes, strong hands that had worked hard for everything she had, and a spine that had bent too often under the weight of others' expectations. But spines can straighten. Dreams deferred are not dreams denied, and sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly who you don't want to be. Before I share what happened next in my journey, I want to hear from you. If you've ever felt overlooked by your own family, just comment "overlooked" below. Your story matters, and so do you. And if you're finding value in this story, please subscribe to hear more tales of unexpected triumph. The next morning brought the kind of November chill that cuts through your coat and settles in your bones. But I felt strangely warm as I walked through downtown Minneapolis. I had made a decision in the sleepless hours after midnight, one that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I was going to apply to the police academy. At 57, most people would call it a midlife crisis. I called it a midlife awakening. The idea wasn't completely random. I had always been fascinated by law enforcement, drawn to the idea of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. As a child, while my sister played with dolls, I watched cop shows and read detective novels. In college, my criminal justice professors had encouraged me to consider law enforcement, but back then, the weight of family expectations had steered me toward more appropriate careers for women. I had worked in social services, in office administration, in retail management jobs that paid the bills but never fed my soul. The Minnesota police, Academy application sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I filled it out. Every time I picked up the pen, I could hear their voices. Margaret, don't you think you're a little old for this? Police work is dangerous, dear. Why can't you just find a nice man and settle down? But their voices were growing quieter, drowned out by something stronger, my own voice. Finally, speaking up after decades of silence. The physical fitness requirements looked daunting on paper. At 57, I wasn't in the worst shape, but I wasn't exactly athletic either. I had soft hands from office work, a tendency to get winded climbing stairs, and knees that creaked like old floorboards, but I also had something many younger candidates didn't: life experience, resilience born from years of disappointment, and the desperate hunger of someone with nothing left to lose. You know what's interesting about starting over later in life? People either admire your courage or question your sanity, and there's rarely any middle ground. The police academy staff looked at my application with barely concealed skepticism, but they couldn't legally turn me away based on age alone. I had to pass the same tests as everyone else, meet the same standards, survive the same grueling months of training. The academy was located in a nondescript building that looked more like a high school than a place where future law enforcement officers were forged. On my first day, I walked into a classroom full of eager 20-somethings, most of whom looked like they could bench press me without breaking a sweat. The instructor, a grizzled sergeant with 30 years on the job, looked at me with the kind of expression you'd wear if someone brought a poodle to a dog fight. But here's what I've learned about being underestimated: it can be your greatest advantage if you know how to use it. While my classmates focused on trying to intimidate each other, I focused on learning. While they worried about looking tough, I worried about being prepared. While they saw me as the weak link, I saw them as motivation. The physical training nearly broke me those first few weeks. Every morning at 5 a.m., we gathered in the gymnasium for calisthenics that left me gasping and sweating in ways I hadn't since high school gym class. But something remarkable happened as the weeks passed. My soft hands developed calluses. My creaky knees grew stronger. My body, which I had written off as past its prime, began responding to the challenge with a resilience that surprised everyone, including myself. I'm not going to lie to you, there were moments I wanted to quit. Moments when the pain in my muscles was matched only by the doubt in my mind. But quitting would have meant going back to that apartment, back to that version of myself who apologized for existing. And after that Thanksgiving dinner, I knew that version of me was gone forever. The best is yet to come in this story. So, make sure you're subscribed to see how this journey unfolds. The firearms training was where I found my unexpected talent. We stood in a line at the shooting range, the sharp smell of gunpowder hanging in the air, and I approached the target with the same methodical precision I brought to everything else. The instructor showed us proper stance, breathing technique, sight alignment, while younger cadets rushed through their rounds, eager to prove their shooting prowess. I took my time. The first shot surprised everyone, including me, dead center. The second, the same. By the end of the session, my target looked like it had been carefully dotted with a marker rather than shot with bullets. The instructor, Sergeant Martinez, walked over to examine my work with raised eyebrows. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, loud enough for the class to hear. "Cadet Rodriguez, you've been showing off your marksmanship for weeks, and the rookie just schooled you." That moment changed everything. Word spread quickly through the academy that the older woman, the one they had all assumed would wash out in the first week, was outperforming candidates half her age in multiple areas. It wasn't just the shooting. My test scores were consistently at the top of the class. My knowledge of criminal law, procedure, and investigation techniques ran circles around my younger classmates. Life experience, it turned out, was worth more than youthful energy. But success at the academy brought new challenges. Some of my classmates began to resent my performance, whispering that the instructors were going easy on me, that I was getting special treatment because of my age. The truth was exactly the opposite. I was held to a higher standard because nobody expected me to succeed. Every small failure was magnified, every success scrutinized for signs of favoritism. The real test came during tactical training scenarios. These were elaborate role-playing exercises designed to simulate real-world police situations: domestic violence calls, traffic stops gone wrong, armed robberies in progress. The scenarios were filmed and critiqued, with every decision analyzed and graded. In one memorable exercise, I played the responding officer to a hostage situation. While my younger colleagues tried to storm in with guns drawn, I used my life experience to de-escalate the situation through conversation and patience. Graduation day from the police academy arrived on a crisp February morning, the kind where your breath forms clouds and the Minnesota snow crunches underfoot like broken glass. I stood in formation with 43 other new officers, my dress uniform pressed to perfection, my badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the ceremony hall. Looking out at the sparse audience, I spotted a few family members who had come to support their graduating officers. My section remained empty. I had sent invitations to my parents, my sister, even my nephew who had tried to film my Thanksgiving tumble. The responses were either silence or polite excuses. "I have a prior commitment," my sister had said over the phone, her voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment. "Mom and Dad think this whole police thing is just another one of your phases." Another phase, as if dedicating 6 months of my life to intensive training, as if graduating third in my class, as if completely transforming myself was comparable to the time I tried learning pottery or took that cooking class. But as I stood there, bowed heavy on my chest, I realized their absence was actually a gift. For the first time in my adult life, I had accomplished something purely for myself, without seeking their approval or fearing their judgment. The woman who had stumbled in that dining room 3 months ago would have been devastated by their absence. The woman standing in formation felt liberated by it. My first assignment was to the 3rd Precinct in South Minneapolis, a busy district that saw everything from petty theft to violent crime. The precinct building was a utilitarian concrete structure that had seen better decades, with fluorescent lights that flickered and coffee that could strip paint. But to me, walking through those doors for the first shift was like entering a cathedral. This was where I would prove that age was just a number, that experience was more valuable than assumptions, that the family failure could become someone worth respecting. The desk sergeant, a woman named Patricia who had been on the job for 15 years, looked me up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless rookies come and go. "So you're the academy star I've been hearing about," she said, not unkindly. "Word is you can outshoot officers half your age and think like someone with twice the experience." She paused, studying my face. "Just remember, the academy is one thing, the street is something else entirely." My first day on patrol paired me with Officer Jake Thompson, a 10-year veteran who had the weathered look of someone who had seen too much but still cared enough to do the job right. He was initially skeptical about being assigned to train a rookie who was older than his mother, but Jake was professional enough to give me a fair chance. We drove through the neighborhoods of South Minneapolis in a squad car that smelled like coffee and stress, the radio crackling with calls that would soon become the soundtrack of my new life. Our first call was a domestic disturbance on Chicago Avenue, the kind of situation that can escalate from 0 to deadly in seconds. A neighbor had reported screaming and the sound of breaking glass from the apartment upstairs. As we climbed the narrow staircase, Jake briefed me in whispers. The couple had a history of calls. The man had priors for assault. The woman had been hospitalized twice but never pressed charges. Standard protocol was to separate them, take statements, and try to de-escalate. When we knocked on the door, it opened to reveal a scene that broke my heart. A young woman, maybe 25, stood with a split lip and a bruise blooming purple around her left eye. Behind her, a man paced like a caged animal, his fists clenched, his eyes wild with rage and alcohol. The apartment was small and cluttered, with broken dishes scattered across the linoleum floor. The smell of fear hung in the air, thicker than the cigarette smoke. Jake started to follow protocol, but something in the woman's eyes stopped me. I had seen that look before, not in police training, but in mirrors. It was the look of someone who had been told they were worthless for so long they had started to believe it. While Jake dealt with the man, I knelt beside her on the couch, speaking quietly, woman to woman, survivor to survivor. "I know you're scared," I told her, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I know you think this is your fault, that you somehow deserve this. But I'm here to tell you that nobody deserves to be treated this way. Not you, not anyone." Something in my voice, some note of understanding that came from my own experience of being diminished and dismissed, reached her in a way that protocol never could. That domestic call became a turning point. Not just for the young woman who finally agreed to press charges and seek help, but for my career as well. Word spread through the precinct that the rookie had handled a difficult situation with unusual skill and compassion. Over the following months, I found myself being requested for similar calls situations where experience and empathy mattered more than youth and aggression. I developed a reputation as the officer who could talk people down from their worst moments, who could find common ground with troubled teenagers, who could convince witnesses to come forward and victims to trust the system. My case clearance rate was among the highest in the precinct, not because I was the fastest or strongest officer, but because I understood something my younger colleagues were still learning. Police work is fundamentally about human connection. The work was demanding in ways I hadn't expected. The physical challenges of the academy had been replaced by emotional and psychological ones that tested me in different ways. I saw humanity at its worst: addiction, abuse, desperation, and violence that seemed senseless and endless. There were nights I came home to my apartment and sat in my car for 20 minutes, just trying to process what I had witnessed, trying to find a way to leave the darkness at work instead of carrying it home. But there were also moments of profound purpose, times when I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be. Like the night I talked a suicidal teenager down from a bridge, spending 4 hours in freezing rain just listening to her story and convincing her that tomorrow might be different. Or the morning I arrested a drunk driver and realized he was the same man who had laughed at my Thanksgiving stumble, my brother-in-law Mark, who suddenly didn't find the situation quite so amusing when he was on the receiving end of my professionalism. That the irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had dismissed me as incompetent and clumsy was now seeing my name in the local newspaper's police blotter, reading about my commendations and community involvement. My sister called once, awkwardly congratulating me on doing so well with my little hobby, still unable to acknowledge that what I had built was a career, not a pastime. 18 months into my patrol career, an opportunity arose that would change everything. The Minnesota State Police were recruiting experienced officers for specialized training in executive protection and security operations. The position would involve protecting high-profile officials, dignitaries, and other individuals who required enhanced security measures. It was demanding work that required extensive background investigation, psychological evaluation, and specialized training that most officers never received. The application process was rigorous, involving multiple interviews, fitness assessments, and scenario-based evaluations. I found myself competing against officers with decades more experience, many of them younger, most of them male. The selection committee questioned my age, my relatively short time in law enforcement, and my ability to handle the physical demands of protection work. But they couldn't question my record, my test scores, or the recommendations from supervisors who had seen me perform under pressure. The training facility was located in a secure compound outside St. Paul, a place where future Secret Service agents and state protection officers learned to think like potential assassins in order to stop them. We studied threat assessment, crowd psychology, and emergency medical procedures. We learned advanced driving techniques, practicing high-speed pursuits, and evasive maneuvers on closed courses. We studied the psychology of violence, learning to spot potential threats before they materialized into action. The firearms training was unlike anything I had experienced in the academy. We practiced shooting while moving, while under stress, in low-light conditions, and in close quarters. We learned to engage multiple targets in rapid succession, to make split-second decisions about when to shoot and when to hold fire. My natural marksmanship ability, honed during academy training, elevated to a new level under the pressure and precision required for protection work. But the most challenging aspect of the training wasn't physical or tactical. It was psychological. Executive protection officers don't just guard bosses, they guard lives, careers, and sometimes the stability of government itself. The weight of that responsibility required a mental toughness that went beyond anything I had developed in patrol work. We were trained to be constantly vigilant, to see threats everywhere, to be prepared to sacrifice our own lives without hesitation if necessary. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 2 years and 3 months after the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed my life. I was sitting in my patrol car, finishing paperwork from a routine traffic stop, when my radio crackled with a message to call headquarters immediately. My supervisor, Lieutenant Johnson, sounded unusually formal. When he came on the line, "Officer Margaret, You need to report to the state police headquarters this afternoon. Governor Hendrick's security detail has requested you specifically for an upcoming assignment. My hands trembled slightly as I wrote down the address and time. The governor of Minnesota, the highest-ranking elected official in the state, and they had requested me. The drive to state headquarters felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The building was impressive in a way that spoke of serious business and serious security and marked cars in the parking lot. Officers who carried themselves with military precision, an atmosphere of controlled intensity that I had only imagined from watching movies and television shows. Captain Sarah Morrison greeted me in a conference room that overlooked the state capitol building. She was a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who had earned every rank through competence and determination, not politics or connections. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, her voice professional but not unfriendly. "Officer Margaret, your record speaks for itself," she began, opening a thick folder that contained my personnel file. "Top marks in the academy, excellent, performance evaluations, specialized training, completion with honors, and something that can't be taught: judgment under pressure. We need that kind of reliability for what we have in mind." She paused, studying my face. "How do you feel about leading a motorcade for the governor's public appearances?" Leading a motorcade. The words hit me like a physical blow. In executive protection, the lead vehicle is responsible for route security, threat assessment, and coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure safe passage. It was a position of enormous responsibility, one that required split-second decision-making and absolute reliability. It was also a position that would be visible to the public, to the media, and to anyone who might be watching. The preparation for my first motorcade assignment consumed the next several weeks of my life. I studied route maps until I could navigate them blindfolded, memorizing every intersection, every potential choke point, every place where trouble might arise. I learned the protocols for communicating with air support, ground units, and the command center. I practiced emergency procedures until they became muscle memory: what to do if the route was blocked, if there was a mechanical failure, if a threat materialized. The governor, Patricia Hendricks, was a woman in her early 60s who had built her political career on education reform and economic development. She had a reputation for being approachable and genuine, someone who genuinely cared about the people she served. But approachability in politics can be a security nightmare, as it often means uncontrolled environments, unexpected interactions, and crowds of people who haven't been screened. My first assignment would be a public education forum at a community college in Duluth, a 3-hour drive north through scenic but potentially hazardous terrain. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening, which meant rush hour traffic, reduced visibility, and all the variables that made protection work challenging. The advanced team had been working for weeks to secure the venue, establish safe routes, and coordinate with local law enforcement. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through scenarios, mentally rehearsing responses to every possible threat or complication. What if we encountered protesters? What if there was a medical emergency? What if someone tried to block the route? What if? The weight of responsibility felt heavier than any equipment I had ever carried, but alongside the anxiety was something else: a sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. The woman who had stumbled at Thanksgiving dinner would never have imagined herself in this position, but the woman I had become, forged by challenge and strengthened by purpose, felt ready for whatever came next. The morning of the motorcade dawned clear and cold, with the kind of Minnesota autumn weather that makes the sky look impossibly blue and the air taste like winter promises. I arrived at the staging area before sunrise, running through final equipment checks and route confirmations. The other officers on the detail were seasoned professionals, most with years of executive protection experience, all of them initially surprised to find themselves taking orders from a rookie who was older than some of their mothers. But professionalism won out over skepticism. They had read the same personnel files, seen the same training scores, and understood that Captain Morrison didn't make assignments based on sentiment. As we went through our final briefing, reviewing hand signals, radio protocols, and emergency procedures, I felt the team coalescing into a single unit focused on one mission: bringing the governor safely to Duluth and back. The governor emerged from the Capitol building at exactly 8 a.m., flanked by her personal aide and press secretary. She was smaller in person than she appeared on television, but her presence filled the space around her in a way that reminded me why she had been elected to the highest office in the state. When Captain Morrison introduced me as the motorcade leader, Governor Hendricks looked directly at me with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Officer Margaret," she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake, "I understand you have an interesting background. From patrol work to motorcade leader in less than 3 years, that's impressive by any standard." There was genuine warmth in her voice, but also the kind of assessment that came from someone accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. "I'm looking forward to working with you." As we pulled away from the Capitol building, I felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on my shoulders like a mantle. In the lead vehicle, I was responsible not just for navigation, but for making real-time decisions that could affect the safety of the state's highest elected official. The radio chatter was constant, but controlled, updates from air support, check-ins from security teams along the route, coordination with local law enforcement at every jurisdiction boundary. The drive to Duluth took us through some of Minnesota's most beautiful countryside, but I barely noticed the scenery. My attention was focused entirely on the task at hand, monitoring radio communications, watching for anything out of the ordinary, maintaining the precise speed and following distance that kept the entire motorcade moving as a coordinated unit. Every overpass was a potential sniper position. Every crowded intersection was a security concern. Every unexpected vehicle on the highway was a possible threat. About halfway through the journey, we encountered our first test. Construction on Interstate 35 had reduced traffic to a single lane, creating a bottleneck that could trap the motorcade in a vulnerable position. The advance team had known about the construction, but road conditions can change rapidly, and what looked manageable in planning can become dangerous in reality. I made the decision to divert to the alternate route we had mapped as a contingency, coordinating with air support to ensure the new path was clear and communicating the change to all units simultaneously. It added 20 minutes to our travel time, but it kept the motorcade moving at a safe speed through controlled territory. Later, Captain Morrison would commend me for making a textbook decision under pressure, but in the moment, it felt like simple common sense. The community college in Duluth was a modest campus that had been transformed into a security zone for the governor's visit. Local law enforcement had established a perimeter, checked every building, and screened every attendee. As we pulled into the secured area, I felt a moment of deep satisfaction. We had successfully transported the governor across 180 miles of potentially dangerous territory without incident. But the job wasn't finished. The most dangerous part of any protection assignment is often the public appearance itself, crowds of people, multiple entrances and exits, and the controlled chaos that comes with political events. As the governor's car door opened and she stepped out to greet the waiting crowd, I positioned myself to scan faces, watch hands, and monitor the perimeter for anything that didn't belong. The event went smoothly, with Governor Hendricks discussing education funding and economic development with the kind of passion and knowledge that reminded me why public service mattered. But I barely heard her words. My attention was entirely focused on security, on the crowd, on the thousand small details that could mean the difference between a successful event and a tragedy. The return trip to St. Paul provided its own unique challenges. Evening traffic was heavier, visibility was reduced, and there's something about darkness that makes protection work more difficult and more important. The governor was tired from a full day of public appearances, but she remained alert and professional, understanding that her security was a team effort that required her cooperation and awareness. We were about 40 miles south of Duluth when the radio crackled with an urgent message from air support. "Lead vehicle, we have a situation developing ahead of your position. Unconfirmed reports of vehicles attempting to block the highway. Recommend immediate route change to alternate path." Charlie, my pulse jumped, but my voice remained steady as I acknowledged the transmission and began implementing the contingency plan we had rehearsed but hoped never to use. Within seconds, the entire motorcade was smoothly transitioning to a secondary route, coordinated like a dance we had practiced until it was perfect. Later investigation would reveal that the threat was actually a minor traffic accident that had been mistakenly reported as something more sinister. But in the moment, it felt very real. The governor, monitoring our communications from her vehicle, later told me that what impressed her most wasn't my reaction to the potential threat, but the calm professionalism with which the entire team had responded. "You didn't panic, you didn't hesitate, and you didn't take unnecessary risks," she said during our debrief. "That's exactly what we need in this position." As we pulled back into the secured garage at the state capitol building, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond successfully completing my first major assignment. I had proven to myself and to my colleagues that age, background, and family expectations were irrelevant when measured against competence, dedication, and the willingness to rise to a challenge. The other members of the protection detail, who had been politely skeptical at the beginning of the day, treated me differently now, not with the patronizing courtesy they might show to someone they were humoring, but with the respect earned by a professional who had proven herself under pressure. It was a recognition I had never received from my biological family, but it meant more than any grudging acknowledgement they might eventually offer. Word of the successful Duluth operation spread quickly through the tight-knit community of state law enforcement. Within days, Captain Morrison called me into her office with news that would have seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. "The governor has specifically requested you for her security detail on a permanent basis," she said, her tone carrying both congratulations and warning. "This isn't just about driving motorcades. You'll be responsible for advanced security planning, threat assessment, and coordinating with federal agencies when necessary." The promotion came with a significant increase in responsibility and a corresponding increase in scrutiny. Every decision I made would be reviewed, analyzed, and critiqued by supervisors who understood that a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. But it also came with something I had never experienced in my family life: trust. The governor and her senior staff trusted me to keep her safe, trusted my judgment, trusted my ability to perform under the most demanding circumstances. My new office was in the state capitol building itself, a space that still felt surreal every morning when I badged through security and walked past the marble statues of Minnesota's political history. The work was fascinating and challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. I found myself studying intelligence reports, analyzing threat assessments, and coordinating with agencies ranging from the FBI to local sheriff's departments. One of my first major assignments was planning security for the governor's appearance at the state fair, an event that drew hundreds of thousands of people over 12 days and presented security challenges that made a simple motorcade look straightforward by comparison: open spaces, multiple venues, crowds that could shift unpredictably, and the kind of controlled chaos that made threat assessment nearly impossible. I spent weeks studying the fairgrounds, walking every path, identifying choke points and escape routes, coordinating with fair security and local law enforcement. The planning process was exhaustive, involving contingencies for everything from medical emergencies to terrorist attacks. But it was also intellectually stimulating in a way that reminded me why I had fallen in love with police work in the first place. The state fair operation was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in late August. During the peak attendance period, when the crowds would be largest and most unpredictable, Governor Hendricks was scheduled to make appearances at 3 different venues: the Agriculture Building for a farm policy speech, the Grandstand for a brief ceremony honoring state veterans, and the International Bazaar for a cultural celebration that would involve dozens of community organizations. Each location required its own security plan, its own advance team, its own set of contingencies. But they all had to be coordinated as part of a larger operation that would move the governor safely through a crowd of nearly 200,000 people. The logistics were staggering, involving more than 50 law enforcement officers, air support, and coordination with fair security personnel who knew the grounds better than anyone. The morning of the operation, I arrived at the fairgrounds before dawn to oversee final preparations and conduct a security walkthrough of each location. The empty fairgrounds felt eerie in the gray morning light, like a stage waiting for the performance to begin. By noon, those empty pathways would be packed with families, teenagers, senior citizens, and everyone in between, a security officer's nightmare and a Democratic politician's dream. As the crowds began arriving and the governor's motorcade approached the fairgrounds, I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with absolute focus. This was what I had been training for. The moment when months of preparation would be tested by the unpredictable reality of public service. The radio chatter was constant as teams reported in from their positions throughout the grounds. The governor's first appearance went flawlessly. Her speech about agricultural policy was well received by farmers and agribusiness representatives, and the crowd was manageable and enthusiastic. But as we moved toward the grandstand, I noticed something that made my pulse quicken. A group of protesters had gathered near the entrance, their signs and chants suggesting they were there to disrupt the veteran ceremony. The protesters weren't necessarily dangerous, but they represented the kind of unpredictable variable that could turn a routine security operation into a crisis. As we approached the grandstand, I made the decision to adjust our route, using a service entrance that would allow the governor to reach the stage without having to pass through the crowd of demonstrators. But Governor Hendricks had other ideas. When she was briefed on the route change, she made a decision that embodied everything I had come to respect about her leadership. "I'm not going to hide from people who disagree with me," she said firmly. "These veterans deserve to see the governor walk through the front door, not sneak in the back. Officer Margaret, I trust your team to keep everyone safe while I do my job." It was a moment that crystallized the complexity of protection work. Our job wasn't just to keep the governor physically safe, it was to enable her to fulfill her responsibilities. As an elected official, even when that meant accepting calculated risks, I quickly coordinated with the protest control team, ensuring that demonstrators would be kept at a safe distance, while still allowing them to exercise their First Amendment rights. The walk from the motorcade to the grandstand entrance became an exercise in controlled tension. The governor moved confidently through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and greet fairgoers, while I maintained a protective formation around her. The protesters chanted and waved their signs, but they remained peaceful, and the veterans waiting for the ceremony responded with applause that drowned out the dissent. As Governor Hendricks took the stage to honor veterans who had served their country with distinction, I felt a deep sense of pride that went beyond the successful completion of another security operation. This was democracy in action: elected officials, accessible to the people they served, citizens free to express their views, and law enforcement professionals ensuring that both could happen safely and peacefully. The final event of the day was the cultural celebration at the International Bazaar, a vibrant gathering that represented the diversity of Minnesota's immigrant communities. The venue was more challenging from a security perspective: multiple entrances, vendors, and displays that created visual obstacles, and a crowd that was both larger and more diverse than the earlier events. But it was also the kind of event that reminded me why public service mattered. Children in traditional costumes performed dances from their ancestral homelands. Food vendors offered tastes of dozens of different cultures, and Governor Hendricks moved through the crowd with genuine enthusiasm for the communities she represented. It was America at its best, and I was proud to play a small role in making it possible. As the day wound down and we began the process of extracting the governor from the fairgrounds, I reflected on how far I had traveled from that Thanksgiving dinner disaster. The woman who had stumbled while carrying a casserole dish had become the officer responsible for protecting the state's highest elected official at Minnesota's largest public event. The transformation felt both impossible and inevitable. The drive back to the Capitol building was quiet, with Governor Hendricks reviewing notes from her appearances and the security team conducting our standard after-action review. As we pulled into the secured garage, Captain Morrison's voice came over the radio with a message that would change my life once again. "Excellent work today, team. Officer Margaret, the governor, has requested a private debrief in her office tomorrow morning. And congratulations, you've just been selected to lead her motorcade for next month's Regional Governors Conference." The Regional Governors Conference, it was a high-profile event that would bring together the governors of 12 Midwestern states, along with federal officials, media representatives, and security personnel from multiple agencies. The logistics would be exponentially more complex than anything I had handled before, and the stakes would be correspondingly higher. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same small space where I had nursed my wounded pride after that Thanksgiving humiliation, and tried to process the magnitude of what was happening. In less than 3 years, I had gone from family laughingstock to leading security operations for multi-state political events. The journey felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. The Governor's Conference was held at a resort in northern Minnesota, a location that offered both the privacy necessary for high-level political discussions and the security challenges that came with a remote, wooded setting. The advanced planning took 3 weeks and involved coordination with the FBI, Secret Service, state police from 12 different states, and local law enforcement agencies throughout the region. My role had expanded beyond motorcade operations to include overall security coordination for the Minnesota delegation. I found myself in planning meetings with federal agents who had decades more experience, presenting threat assessments to officials whose decisions affected millions of people, and coordinating logistics that would have seemed impossible when I was writing traffic tickets just a few years earlier. The morning of the conference opening ceremony, I stood in the command center reviewing final security arrangements when Governor Hendricks approached with a visitor. I didn't immediately recognize an older woman with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Officer Margaret," the governor said, "I'd like you to meet Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee." Senator Williams studied me with intelligent eyes that reminded me of my old academy instructors: assessing, measuring, evaluating. "Governor Hendricks has been telling me about your unconventional path to law enforcement," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in Washington, starting the academy at 57 and rising to lead executive protection operations in less than 3 years. That's remarkable by any standard. What happened next would become the defining moment of my professional life. "We're looking for experienced officers to join a new federal task force focused on protecting elected officials at all levels of government," Senator Williams continued. "The work would involve coordination between federal, state, and local agencies, development of new security protocols, and training programs for officers nationwide." Interested, the offer was both thrilling and terrifying. Federal law enforcement, working with agencies I had only heard about, developing policies that would affect protection operations across the country. It was an opportunity that would have been unimaginable when I was cleaning green bean casserole off my sister's floor. But it also meant leaving Minnesota, leaving the governor who had trusted me, leaving the life I had built from the ashes of family rejection. The decision to accept the federal position wasn't made lightly. It meant relocating to Washington, D.C., starting over once again in an environment where my age and background would make me an anomaly among career federal agents. But it also meant the chance to influence protection policies that could save lives, to help train the next generation of officers who might face their own moments of doubt and determination. Governor Hendricks supported the decision, understanding that my career growth ultimately benefited the broader law enforcement community. "You've proven that experience and judgment mattered more than traditional career paths," she told me during our final meeting in her Capitol office. "Now take that lesson to the federal level and show them what Minnesota officers can accomplish." The transition to Washington involved leaving behind not just a job, but a community that had become my true family. The men and women I had served with in Minnesota had given me something my biological family never had: respect earned through competence, trust built through reliability, and acceptance based on performance rather than expectations. But change had become my constant companion, and I had learned to embrace it rather than fear it. The federal training program was intensive, involving everything from advanced threat assessment to international security protocols. At 60 years old, I found myself studying Arabic phrases, learning about diplomatic security procedures, and working with agents half my age, who quickly learned that experience was a valuable teacher. My first major federal assignment was developing security protocols for a presidential campaign event in Chicago, massive undertaking that involved coordinating with dozens of agencies, analyzing thousands of potential threats, and ensuring the safety of the candidate, the public, and the hundreds of law enforcement officers involved in the operation. The presidential event was scheduled for a Friday evening in October, exactly 3 years after that life-changing Thanksgiving dinner. As I stood in the command center at McCormick Place, coordinating security operations for an event that would draw 20,000 people and national media attention, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had stumbled while carrying a casserole dish could never have imagined herself in this position, but the woman I had become, forged by rejection, strengthened by challenge, and refined by purpose, felt ready for whatever came next. The radio chatter around me was constant as teams reported in from positions throughout the venue. Air support confirmed clear skies, and advanced teams conducted final sweeps of the facility. As the presidential motorcade approached the venue, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes protection work. But there was something else, to a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond professional accomplishment. I had proven that family expectations don't define your limits, that age is irrelevant when measured against determination, and that, sometimes the greatest gift your critics can give you is showing you exactly who you don't want to be. The event concluded successfully, with the candidate delivering a speech to an enthusiastic crowd, while hundreds of law enforcement officers ensured that democracy could function safely and peacefully. As the motorcade departed and the crowds dispersed, I received a text message that I almost didn't read, assuming it was another operational update. Instead, it was from my sister. Saw you on the news leading the presidential security detail. Mom and Dad saw it too. We're proud of you. Margaret, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling neither anger nor vindication, just a quiet sense of closure. The approval I had once desperately craved from them no longer seemed necessary or even relevant today. As I prepare for another high-profile security operation, I often think about that Thanksgiving dinner and the gift it unknowingly gave me. Their laughter pushed me toward a life I never would have chosen otherwise, toward challenges that revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed, toward a purpose that fulfilled me in ways family acceptance never could have. The woman who stumbled in that dining room was seeking approval from people who were incapable of giving it. The woman who now leads federal security operations has learned that the only approval that matters is the kind you earn through competence, dedication, and the courage to become who you were meant to be, regardless of who others think you should be. I want to hear from you about your own journey of transformation. Have you ever turned a moment of humiliation into motivation for change? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who needs to hear that. It's never too late to rewrite your story. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more tales of unexpected triumph and the courage to begin again at any age. Your support helps me share these stories of resilience and redemption with people who need to know that family rejection can become the foundation for personal victory.